Hi, thanks for joining me today. Today we're going to talk about consciousness versus unconsciousness. Our conscious awareness is what we are aware of. Everything else is unconscious. And sometimes the unconscious gets a bad rap. But really, our unconscious mind is always trying to create a state of homeostasis and balance. It's always looking for congruency. The conscious mind is what is trying to make sense of the world around us. In some instances, it's easy to make sense. I know that red and blue make purple, and that makes sense to me because I can see it with my eyes. But sometimes when I see something that doesn't make sense, it's hard for me to wrap my brain around it. It might even create cognitive dissonance or an incongruency between my conscious awareness and my unconscious mind. When we experience trauma, our cognitive brain goes into overload. It tries desperately to make sense of what has happened. And 99.9% of the time, it can't do that on its own. Some people turn to talk therapy to help them process through what's happened and come to an acceptance. And some people use somatic techniques that don't require a lot of cognitive processing. There's no right way to process trauma, but there are several different approaches. At the end of the day, we're looking for the same thing no matter which approach we choose. We're looking for congruency. When there is an upset, my mind has a particular perception. That perception is that something has happened that's not right. I can't understand it. How did that person do this thing? What happened? Where did I go wrong? Why does this keep happening? So my conscious awareness is trying to figure it out and make sense of it. My unconscious awareness understands that I am a divine being in a human experience, and that every other being is a divine being in a human experience as well. Now, this upset might have precipitated limiting beliefs and self-judgments into the unconscious mind that might be making this process even more dissonant. The distance between conscious awareness and the unconscious mind becomes even more separate or disconnected, and it looks like there is a huge difference between what my conscious awareness thinks and what my unconscious awareness thinks. When we are working with trauma, we are working to neutralize the dissonance and bring everything back into congruency. Again, we can do this with several different methods. Cognitive behavioral therapy is a great tool to use to process through trauma. Cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavioral therapy should only be administered by licensed professionals who are trained to do so. We can also use the techniques found within yoga, the philosophy of yoga, the yamas, the niyamas, asana, pranayama, pratyahara. All of these tools help us to come back into congruency. When we look at the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, Patanjali tells us that the 5 reasons that we suffer are ignorance, ego, attachment, aversion, and the fear of impermanence. Well, all of these things are attachment. When I'm in ignorance, I'm attached to my perception. I think I'm right, I think I know. Well, ignorance means that I don't know. Well, when I'm in ignorance, I'm attached to the idea that I know, even if I don't. Ego's the same thing. When I'm in ego, I'm attached to I, me, and my. I am individual, and I'm attached to that. That's actually part of my identity. Attachment is attachment. Aversion is the opposite of attachment. If I'm attached to vanilla ice cream, I want vanilla ice cream in order to be satisfied. If I am averted to not having vanilla ice cream, that is the opposite of the attachment to vanilla ice cream. For example, if I am attached to health and well-being, I might have an aversion to dis-ease. Why? Because I'm attached to health and well-being. The fear of impermanence is ignorance. It's an attachment to our perception. We perceive ourselves to be permanent. We think that we're going to live forever. And unfortunately, that's not the purpose of this whole experience. The purpose of the experience is to be fully present with what is arising as it arises. But when we experience trauma, it is extremely challenging to do that because the convoluted messages that we're receiving from the conscious and unconscious mind create more of an expanse and less wholeness. Essentially, it reinforces the misperception of separation. As we use the tools found within yoga, we begin to neutralize the polarity between our perception. We let go of attachments, and the more we do this, the more we come into congruency. What once looked like a dive off a cliff into uncharted waters now looks more like a stepping from the beach into the wakes of the ocean or of the river. It's not so scary. It's not so traumatizing or polarizing. It's possible to do this work as a yogi independently. It's possible to help facilitate this work as a yoga teacher or a yoga therapist without the story or the cognitive processing. But it's important to know why it's happening and how we can benchmark our students' and clients' success. The first thing to take into consideration if you're working with students and clients one-on-one who are healing from trauma is to look at where they were when the relationship started. What was their perception when you started using these tools to help to regulate and neutralize perception? For example, if I was to recall a traumatic experience that I had years ago, I might be in a place where I'm thinking that I'm wrong or bad. I might even feel shame. I might not want to talk about it. I might not feel whole and complete at all. I might feel less than and even lacking. That's where I start. That's my benchmark, and I'm going to use that benchmark to see how I'm progressing through my practice. The more I practice, the more I start to dislodge the attachment to my perception of the experience. And I start to open up. I start to allow myself to be compassionate for myself, for my situation, and for anyone who was involved. Now, this can be an extremely challenging process, and it is important to know when to refer out. If a client or student is working with you one-on-one and they seem to need a lot of cognitive processing, you might want to find a therapist who's willing to work with you so that you can hold the space for the yoga and they can hold the space for the processing. Ultimately, though, as you move through these practices, you'll notice that there's a shift in our awareness, in our perception of our awareness, and the attachments start to fall away. The more the attachments fall away, the more we can begin to neutralize that polarity. The more we neutralize the polarity, the more we allow the unconscious and the conscious mind to come into congruency. When the unconscious mind and the conscious mind are in congruency, the whole of the experience is less activating for the central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system, and ultimately the body can let go of some of that holding. When the body lets go of the holding, we can relax, and when we can relax, the parasympathetic nervous system comes online. The parasympathetic nervous system's job is to help to promote healing, health, and well-being. And so if we've lived an entire life in a state of hyperarousal, if our sympathetic nervous system has been running the show for most of our lives, then this is a huge deal. Finally, the parasympathetic nervous system can come online and help to downregulate the sympathetic nervous system. When this happens, we start to feel a shift in energy, but we also start to learn new ways to regulate the body. These self-regulation tools are the keys to trauma-informed yoga. Remember, trauma-informed yoga is not about processing cognitively. It's about giving students tools that they can use to regulate themselves. Pranayama practices, asana practices, pratyahara practices, meditation, yoga nidra, all of these things help to regulate the body. They help the body to get into a state of homeostasis. When the body is in a state of homeostasis, the mind is not in cognitive dissonance, and everything is in order. I hope this lecture has been helpful. All of the tools that we use to regulate the nervous system are held within the 8 limbs of yoga. Yamas and niyamas, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, all of these things are practices that yield states of concentration, meditation, and union. Those are states where we are in congruency. Those are states where we are not out of sync with our body and mind. When we achieve these states, the healing starts. I hope this has been helpful. Be well. Namaste.